All right, drawing students. So here are the tricks to working with colored pencils and making them look good. Your tricks are simple. There are three main tricks. You need to create layers. With colored pencil, you have to fill in all the layers to fill the paper fiber to get it to look really good. So you want to have multiple layers. A second trick is that you want to change direction. In each layer you want to color or shade in a slightly different direction so that it fills in the paper fibers completely and it won't look salty. And then your third trick is that you need to change the amount of pressure you apply to your pencil so that you can build the color. Now there are three main ways you can alter a color, so I'm going to have you mess with these first. And I'm going to just choose red because it usually shows up the best with red. I would like you to make just 3 gradient scales, or gradated scales that go from darker to light, right? So they naturally are going from dark to light, and I'm going to mix in to make a tint, a shade, and a tone. A tint is when you add white to make your color lighter. A shade is when you add black to make your color darker. And a tone is when you add green, or in this case green, or the opposite color, a complementary color, to make the color dull. So I'm going to start with white. When I'm doing this, I'm going to follow these rules. So my first layer is red. When I go back with white, I'm going to color in a slightly different direction. And I'm actually going to start at the opposite end. White often works as a blending tool. So I'm pushing with a little bit more pressure as I go toward the other end of this scale. And as I get to the darker end of the scale, I'm letting up on my pressure. So you can kind of see how it blends, but it still appears salty. I'm going to go back with red, and I'm going to switch my direction with the red, just slightly, not a huge amount. And then as I get to the white end, I'm going to let up on my pressure. And then I'm going to change my direction again, and maybe that's not exactly changing it. I'm going to switch this way. So it's a lot less salty here. You can see fewer white speckles in it. And I'm going to go over this one more time with white and see if I can smooth it out even more in a different direction. And I'm pushing much harder with the white this time. Because white is so light, it's important that you really give it, put a lot of pressure on it. Now I'm going back with red, and the red can go on to the paper a lot more smoothly because it has this waxy layer build up on it already. So that end's a little lighter, this is a little darker, this is a tint of red, which makes pink, as you all know, right? Now the next one is a shade. So when you work with black and colored pencil, you really want to take it easy. So when I start with my shade of black, I'm going to start on the lighter end of the scale and fill in very, very lightly. Any gaps between your lines are going to show up when you use black, especially. We can't take a tortillon and blend over it, so I'm going to go back with another layer of red. And we want the red to look darker, not like it's just got black slapped on top of it. So I'm letting up with my red here, and it's still really, really salty in appearance. You can see a ton of white speckles in it. I'm going to start back here with black again. And as I go up to this end, I'm going to let up on my pressure. I'm not going to push so hard on this end. And now I'm going to really start pushing a little harder with my red. I'm going to apply heavier pressure, so it's really going to start to pull those colors together. And then I'm going to go one more time, just using a little more of the tip of my pencil to push on this and fill it in. And you should be able to tell that this is a lighter red to a darker red. And I can go into it with my black one more time to just really give it that darkness that I want. It's super important that your lines are not gappy like this. You're going really close together, so there is very few gaps between your lines. And that helps it look a little bit more solid and smooth. And here are my shades of red. It almost turns black here. And the last one, same thing. The opposite of red is green, so I'm going to use that to create a tone. So I don't want this to look like just green smacked on top of red. I want it to look like red is changing. So I'm going to do the same thing, green on one end, I'm gonna go back and add red. I'm gonna switch the direction I'm applying the red in. And I'm gonna apply a little heavier pressure because I know the green can take it. And then I'm gonna go back up the green again. And what I want here is to show you how the dullness kind of comes out of the color. It doesn't necessarily become black or dark, it becomes kind of dull or muted, and that's the effect that I'm going for when I use an opposite or complementary color to create a tone. Alright, drawing students, the next practice I want you to complete is the coloring of the fish. Now I have step-by-step directions in the lesson on Schoology, or it shows you the steps, but I'm going to illustrate them here. So I'm going to just draw like a little generic fish. Nothing fancy about this, but what I want you to get from this is the layers. So that's the part I'm going to focus on. When you're using colored pencil to be effective, you're going to follow these rules: layers, direction, pressure. You're also going to start with your lightest color first. So first layer on this fish is just going to be a straight up yellow over the whole thing. And I didn't add a lot of detail to this fish. It could be quite a bit more exotic. I'm going to add a little fin up here and a little fin down here, maybe a little fin back here, and that's it. Maybe a gill line and an eyeball, just for fun. Okay, so I'm going to fill in these other parts. Now your pencil lines you want to get rid of if you want it to all look like color pencil before you go too far. So if it's still pretty light, you can take your pencil and kind of erase any extra lines going between things that you don't want. And color pencil will erase to an extent, but not a huge amount. So my lightest color is down first. It's pretty even. I'm going to try and make this fish look like a goldfish, big and fat. So I'm going to add another color, and I'm going to create a little bit of a gradated scale just going down from the top. So I'm pushing a little harder at the top, and then I'm fading down. Heavier pressure here, and then lighter pressure as I go down. Really, you can use any colors you want in this. There's no requirement to use these colors. Just use colors that are related to each other, because that'll make life easier for getting them to blend and fade. So I'm going a little darker at the start of this, lighter at the end, and then just for fun I'm going to go darker up here on this edge and fade this way with this fin. And I'm going to sandwich the next bit of color in between. So I'm going to add, I had yellow, I added orange, I'm going to go back with yellow again, and I'm going to increase my pressure over the whole thing. Actually, I'm going to start over here again. I'm pushing a little harder, and it's all going to start to make it glow a little bit. Adding these layers is key. But again, another really important part is that you're not coloring crazy like this with lots of gaps between your lines. You have to be coloring consistently so your color appears solid. So that control part is pretty important. It does really affect the overall success of colored pencil, because ultimately it doesn't have a tool like a Tortillion that will blend everything together. And I'm going to go with a slightly darker color here. I'm going to add red, where I really want this to start to sink in. I'm going to add red up here and do the same thing. I'm going to fade it down just a short distance right there. Now this is all still looking pretty salty, but I've got 4 layers on this already. And I'm going to shade a slightly different direction here. And add that little bit of red, and a little bit of red here. Alright, drawing students, so I've gotten the front half of this fish a little bit more developed and burnished by layering and changing pressure. I added black to create some shades up here to give it a little more depth and make it darker. But I'm constantly repeating the step of creating a fade from dark to light and changing my direction. So I'll do it again right here so you can see how I'm like building that black up and to make it look a little more deep on the edges, so it recedes and looks a little more three-dimensional there. I can also do it right down here along this bottom edge of the fish, and there are lots of color layers here. I'm going to shade gently and then fade in and up. But the back half of the fish, I'll show you the process. So you saw the earlier steps here. I'm going to go in with red and a little more pressure to start to build up the color to make it a little darker back here. And at the bottom, I'm going to go in with a little bit of yellow, or sorry, with orange, fading it forward and to the front of the fish a little bit. And I'm trying to make this part look a little bit more rounded. And you can use your eraser on this if you want to just lift off a little bit of color if it's getting to be too orange, too black, whatever. I have a very stubby eraser here, but I can use it to just take a little bit off of this if I want it to be more golden or yellow there. I'm going to go back with my yellow in this area. And of course I can use white. Actually, I'm going to use yellow everywhere. I'm going to put more pressure on my pencil so I can start to take some of the saltiness out. And that's changing it. I'm just building this up slowly. Now I'm also going to go in with black at the top here, like what I did in the front. So you can see it, it's already got a few different layers on it. So I'm going to use the black and gradually let up on my pressure so it makes the top part looking like it's darker. And now I have to go back with another color to blend that black in. I'm going to use red over the top of this. The pressure is probably the most important thing with these color pencils. And changing the direction helps a ton as well. I'm going to rotate this slightly and using orange and pushing a little harder because it's lighter than red and lighter than black. It should help blend that black in. And then I'm going to again go back with black in a slightly different direction to see if I can get that darkness to blend in. You can mix color and fill in the saltiness of colored pencil with isopropyl alcohol, so rubbing alcohol that you buy at a dollar. The other thing you can use is any kind of cooking oil or baby oil. Anything that is oily will help move the color in the paper. And I'm going to show you what this looks like. Anytime the surface of your paper looks like it gets wet with the alcohol, it's not a big deal because it's just going to dry like water. It'll evaporate completely. So I'm going to show you on here, and as I put it on the Q-tip, I rub into the color in a circular motion, and it just pulls the color together and fills in the gaps. And I can also take the Q-tip and then basically just paint with it after that. I'm going to do the rest of this, or I'll leave a quarter of it just unmixed so you can see how it fills in. But this is now dirty, and if I use it anywhere else, it's going to add that color. Then I'm going to take the clean end of a Q-tip and I'll dip it in. So I have a slight amount here, and you could tap it off on a napkin. And then I'm going to start into my color, and you can take it and just move the colors together. It basically fills in the saltiness without the extra work, but it also pulls the color together, but it removes as well. So you have to be mindful of that. Like, it's going to take some color off of your piece. So you have to add back in. And you can color back in after you've applied the alcohol or baby oil. It does work that way, so it's not a big deal if you want to go back, but there's no erasing after this point. If your piece is already burnished, it's not going to do much, and if there isn't a lot of color on there like this, it's not going to do much for it either. You have to actually have a couple layers of color there to make the blending look interesting anyway. Otherwise it just makes it appear solid, and lines that are kind of rough, it's not necessarily a magical cure, like trying to blend that in. I'll show you. I can maybe get that off at best. So the solution might be that if you color and it's not neat and it's just kind of messy, you might be able to get the screwed up lines off with the baby oil, but it's not necessarily going to blend them in nicely like a tortilla does for other things. I can add in other colors though, which is nice. And it sometimes helps if you just let the oil sit in the paper a little bit before you try to blend it, so it moves around a little bit more gently. And then yeah, you can just take that and add on other things into your piece. Play with this option as well on your fish, and you can definitely use it on your project.